Yes, look, it's a good question, and it is a very demanding profession, and it's a changing profession, it's a changing discipline all the time, and my passion is driven by meeting so many different people, coming into their different walks of life, and researching, understanding them, and then transforming their lives, through architecture, through understanding, through urban design, and it's a really very rewarding process. I think some professions like law, they end up with a contract, they all end up with a legal settlement. There's nothing you can see. I see children growing up amidst trees we decided to plant, festivals we invented, new forms of architecture, building companies being successful out of our patronage, and it's a very rewarding profession. And I think the big thing is that it's ever changing, as I said earlier. So constantly you've got to be researching. The discussions we had earlier about digital photography changes in publishing. That's like our realm as well. We've been sideswiped by that, and we all rebound, come back better. It's and that's what keeps us on our toes, I think. Yes, that's a great question as well. And it's funny, I've got my niece who's working with me at the moment. She just finished studying at Oxford Brookes, her third year, and she's here. And so I'm sort of thinking about what's going through her mind. And when this question arrived, I thought, that's got quite a bit of resonance to today. But I've always been a person that's not struggled with my aging in terms of, any sort of midlife crisis, but I've always sort of lived in a younger self, and I, both materially, fitness-wise, I, struggle. God, why can't I run up that hill anymore? God, you're getting on, And I think in my mind as well, with architecture, I sort of have always seen myself as that person growing, experimenting. But to answer the question, what sort of advice would I give someone? I think a lot of people in my part of their career could be quite negative, could be like, oh, don't take it on, it's always a challenge, the world's changed, it's not like the good old days. But in fact, I think it's just, the response I gave earlier about what drives my passion is a bit like what advice I'd give as well. Like it's, I've seen architecture, like there's Mike Webb, who does all the film sets or the stage sets for the Rolling Stones, and all these great bands. He studied architecture with me in London. You look at people like, I'm working for some major client groups now, or Bouygues, the French contractor, and they've got a whole lot of architects working in there who are design managers. And I think, there's so many different roles you can end up, either doing architecture, working for different groups, and it's a platform for you to go off into anything you can imagine, set design. You see people come into it and actually end up as artists rather than architects. And but what the advice I'd really give to them is that don't get trapped either in a building typology. Like some people I just want to be an expert on shopping centres. I couldn't think of anything more boring, I mean, there are stimulating buildings, but like the group we're working with at the moment, designing the new stadium, that's all they do. And they've sort of, one guy there who did the bird's nest in Beijing, then he's doing, the one in Rio, and then the next year he's missed out on Japan. So he's thinking, am I old enough to do the next one? So, you can actually get stuck. Whereas what I'd say to a younger architect was that keep a very broad sense of discipline about what you want to study and how the themes you want to go through, and try and, grow and be flexible. Well, I think, as I mentioned earlier, architects go into all different walks of life, have very many disciplines. I think the key thing is communication. I think that having good communication skills, either through the way you draw things or the ideas you have, making, the complexity into something simple to understand. I think that in architecture, if you're in the front end of it, if you're designing and selling an idea to a community or a group of individuals or private investors, you also have to have quite a thick skin, because as any salesman, your biggest strength is dealing with rejection. And I think, being able to rebound, and sometimes if I lose a job, I think, oh, we didn't want to work with them anyway. and they're missing out on a great opportunity. You've got to be confident in yourself. But I think the key thing is, I worked on this job once, which was communication, and there was, and this is putting it from someone who can talk and explain things clearly and really get a group of people moving as one and basically signing off where you're going. But there was one thing, from the pragmatics of actually just drawing information. There was a project which we were building for Renault in the UK when I was working with Foster's. There was we produced something like, I think it was 76 AO drawings, all hand-drawn in ink, of just the cladding system. And the successful subcontractor that came back had one A1 sheet, and he'd coded everything down to that one drawing. It had as much information on that as everything we'd done in those 76 sheets. And I'm going, wow, this is something to learn here about communication, being effective with it, being powerful with it. So I think there's some of the best skills that you can have. Yes, look, I don't know whether this is a case of growing older. Do your brain. You see with some artists and architects where there's a confidence in your moves that you can actually, you see this with a Japanese brush painter, they can just make one move describing a landscape or a human body and you think, yeah, that's it, Whereas in the past it would be embellished and a bit of shadow and background, and I think it's the ability to anticipate where the moves are going, and therefore out of that there becomes an understanding of the simplicity of the beautiful proportion of spaces, and I think it's also if you look at the sort of the counteracting to trends, that there's a lot of over the last decade, there's been a huge growth in building typologies that have supported amazing shaping of forms. What a lot of those being museums, for example, theatres. They don't need natural light. They are about major cornerstones of the ethos of a culture, and so there's this thing about creating the icon. And what I feel in my heart and my mind, and while we're looking at the practice, is actually to go beyond that and actually get back to some of the more the simple essence of what you're doing, whether it's teaching in a school, whether it's working in a new type of workplace. It's not all about the willfulness of the architects, it's actually about who's in there and what they're experiencing. So, and it was interesting when I made that statement, and then the question came back to me in reference to what building I really liked as a, that had inspired me, and I talked about Borromini's San Carlo alla Quattrofontane in Rome, and I think what stunned me about that building was it was his first major piece, and he had to go at everything. But he looked from the early drawings, and I've actually had them in my hands. These drawings were drawn about 1650 or something like that, all in vellum and silver point. You can see where he's put the compass, where he's sketched, and how he actually edited the things down to the simple bits, and it's got this sort of almost this gorgeous, alive, it feels like a piece of fabric, this draped facade stone, but when you come inside, it's like the most beautiful, primitive space. It's almost monastic in its way, but it doesn't have a lot of decoration. It's just about the simple movement. And I think that, in thinking about this question, that's the sort of thing that's guided me. So it's sort of coming back to the true essence of spaces and people.